Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the educational system of the Democratic Republic of Congo. This webinar has been organized as part of the Erasmus Plus project, REACT, Refugees and Recognition, and it's the fifth and the last webinar in a series that we've been giving since January. My name is Jessica Stannard. I work as Policy Advisor at NARIC, the Dutch NARIC, and I will be hosting this webinar. A unique feature of today's webinar is that it will be given by colleagues from two different NARIC offices, from Ireland and the Flemish NARIC. Our presenters today are Angela Lampkin and Kim van Elderen. Angela is the head of information at Quality and Qualifications Ireland, or QQI, and she's worked in the public education and training sector in Ireland for many years. At QQI, she manages the information section, which includes NARIC Ireland recognition activities. Kim has been working as a credential evaluator at the Flemish NARIC in Belgium since 2009. Since 2016, he has been working with African credentials, focusing on credentials from North and Central Africa. As part of the REACT project, Kim and Angela have collaborated on a country briefing on the DRC. This country briefing provides an overview of education in DRC and recommendations for the evaluation of credentials of refugees, displaced persons, and persons in a refugee-like situation from the DRC. The presentation that Kim and Angela will be given today is based on the country briefing. Before getting started, I just want to say a few words about the REACT project. It builds on the first part of the recently completed Refugees and Recognition project, the goal of which was to develop a common methodology for the recognition of refugees' qualifications. In addition to testing that methodology further, an important activity of the current REACT project is to publish country briefings and offer webinars on the educational systems of Iran, Ethiopia, Somalia, Venezuela, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and to provide recommendations on the evaluation of refugee qualifications coming from these countries. The project partners are the NARIC offices located in Germany, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, and Norway is responsible for coordinating the project. We want to reach as many stakeholders as possible, so the country briefings will be made available on the project website. All of the webinars, including this one, are being recorded, and these recordings will also be published on a YouTube channel associated with the project. The country briefings on Iran, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Venezuela have been posted on the website, and these recordings are available as well. Just two more things that I'd like to say about today's webinar. After Angela and Kim have given their presentation, we'll open the floor up for questions. So please hold your questions till the end of the presentation, and you can ask them via the chat. And after the Q&A, we would be very appreciative if you could fill in a short survey, just 4 questions, to help us improve. If we have any future webinars, you can help us improve the webinars. Okay, so that's it for me for right now. Angela is going to begin. So Angela, I'm going to mute myself. You can take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody from Dublin. Thank you, Jessica, for your introduction. And without further ado, I'm going to begin the presentation, and midway I will hand over to my colleague Kim. My part of the presentation is, I suppose, the overview and introductory material, and then Kim will give you more detail in relation to actual qualifications and our understanding of those qualifications. So the first slide that I have relates to the basic geography of the Republic of Congo, the second largest Central African state, with the main language being French. I suppose that's historical on account of its previously being associated with the Belgian Republic. So the DRC has a number of other languages, obviously, which are important for day-to-day purposes. So we have Lingala, King Congo, Swahili, and Tishuba are the national languages. And I just should say also that much of my sources of information for this presentation came from UK NARIC. So that's just to acknowledge that. My second slide then relates to, I suppose, give you some context in relation to the Democratic Republic of Congo and its current political situation. So it is Republique Democratique du Congo, and it's bordered by Congo, Angola, Zambia, the United Republic of Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, and Central African Republic. It is a very large country, the second largest country in Africa, but is also a very populated country with 80 million people estimated in 2016. It has a provincial structure, and in 2015 there was restructuring and there were 26 provinces. Each of those will be large provinces. Previously, it was part of the Belgian Congo and became independent in 1960. It then became the Democratic Republic. It was called Zaire, and back then again, Democratic Republic of Congo in 1997. So it is a young country. The GDP for 2014 was US $480. It's a rich country in relation to, I suppose, its geological and arable demographic. It has, natural resources of various sorts, and that is in its favour. Generally, however, in relation to my next slide, which gives you some of the context of the country, despite, you might say, the wealth in terms of natural resources, there are many socioeconomic problems in the DRC. High mortality, malnutrition, access to health, and general welfare. There is a history of ongoing conflict and mismanagement of resources. There is what we call food insecurity for the people who live there. Basic public services, education, health, sanitation, I suppose in the cities they will be better than in the rural areas. The Democratic Republic of Congo is also both a source country and a host country for refugees. So they have people both coming to the DRC and, you might say, leaving the DRC for the same reasons. Just to give you an overview of the educational system, and I will give you some more details on that in a few moments. I suppose it does follow many of the, what I would consider European educational systems, with a primary, secondary and higher education sector. So the structure is there, and it's laid out there in the diagram, which you may not be able to see so clearly, but I will talk to you now a little bit more about the actual detail of education. So again, the right to school education is in the Constitution of the Democratic Republic, and there are 6 years of primary education. The medium of instruction is French, and the academic year runs from October to June. Primary, secondary, technical and professional education is overseen by the Minister of l'Enseignement Primaire, Secondaire et Initiation de la Nouvelle Citoyenne. I will apologize for my French accent. Higher education lies with the Ministère de l'Enseignement Supérieur et Universitaire. So that is the basic, I suppose, structure of the education system. And from a practice point of view in education, compulsory primary education, sorry, I need to move on. Compulsory primary education goes from age 6 to 12. In principle, it's free. and there are 2 cycles at primary. And there is a series of subjects that are covered in primary education, and I think you can read those for yourselves on the slides. Completion of primary education leads to the Certificate d'études primaires, the CEP, which grants access to secondary education. There is a test or an examination to obtain the CEP called the National de Fin d'études primaires, the TNAFEP. So this marks the end of primary education. And accounts for 40% of a final grade for the student, with 60% determined by results achieved in class. So that's interesting. It's practical assessment is ongoing at primary level. There is a previous structure, but again, the detail of that is there for you. There was an elementary grade, a middle grade, and a terminal grade. And this structure may be found in some institutions. But I suppose it's not so much of a concern for us in higher education looking at qualifications. Secondary education, now I'm moving into secondary education. So most students study at secondary level from Secondary education requires 6 years of study, and you require the CEP, the Certificate d'études primaires, for entry into that education area. 2 years are common to all students, and it's called a Common Core or the orientation cycle. And then 4 years, a cycle long, referred to as Humanité, in humanities, science, teacher, or technical training streams. And this is called a cycle. There is also professional vocational fields, which are shorter and referred to as cycle court. And this may be similar to some of the European systems. The cycle long programs of study conclude with a final 4-day examination d'état, examen d'état, the state examination. A score of 50% and above confers the Diplôme d'état d'études secondaires du cycle long in the chosen stream. So this is a certificate that no doubt colleagues here will encounter when they are admitting people into higher education. So I want to move on to my next slide, which concerns admission requirements to HE. So moving on from the secondary education, the holder will have the Diplôme d'état d'études secondaires du cycle long or equivalent is required for admission to university education. However, an admissions examination is also often required, though some institutions will waive this requirement if students have higher than average grades in their diploma. Depending on the area of study, those students unsuccessful in their entrance exam may have an option for a preparatory year to access the first year of a degree program. Education here in the DRC is governed in law, and they have a National Education Framework Law, which is a new law of 2014, which determines the general structure and objectives of all levels of education. Interestingly, the DRC has no formalized national framework of qualifications. So that is an important point for us to note. In relation to technical vocational education, again, my source here is UK NARIC. Technical vocational education in the DRC is the responsibility of the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education and New Citizenship Initiation. There are a number of, it begins in the secondary education cycle, where people take that choice of the short cycle of education, which I think many of you will be familiar with. The cycle long, obviously we've spoken about already. So there are numbers of programs there. The 4 to 5 year cycle core professional programs will lead to the award Brevet d'aptitude professionnelle. So here now we are seeing a number of awards or qualifications which will be in circulation from citizens of the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's a note there in relation to nursing, where second level training for nurses is available as a 2-year post-primary qualification. So it's a professional qualification, brevet of the Diplôme A3, or a program deemed comparable to the Diplôme Études Secondaires Cycle Long, and conferring the Diplôme A2. Now, I don't know a lot about that, but it may be of relevance to anybody who is involved with nursing education or employment. Now, at this point, I am going to hand over to my colleague Kim, who will very much take you into the detail of the diplomas and certificates of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you.
Hello, this is Kim speaking from Brussels. Greetings to everyone. I hope you can understand me well. So the reason I included the next slide is because to focus on documentation, since documentation in our experience is very often one of the hard things when evaluating credentials from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the slide shows an article that I've cited responsible for, of the ministry responsible for primary and secondary education. And they state that they have issued the final certificates for students who took the Diplôme d'État, the ex-État, the final exam for secondary education in 2012. And if you look real well, if you can see the pointer, that they issued those documents in May 2017. So this is a delay of almost 5 years we're speaking about, and it hasn't always been this bad. There have been years when they managed to issue the final certificates in 1 year, but over the last year, it's often been 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or even 5 years. So this leaves a lot of students who have finished secondary education without the actual final certificate that we would be expecting. So how do students find out whether they passed or not? This is actually by an SMS-based service. The ministry works together with telecom operators, and students can buy a SIM or a registration to actually follow up their results and find out if they've passed or not. But ironically, they won't be having any documents to show that they passed at that very moment. Also, a recent change is that the ministry decided that the final certificate, in order to receive the documents, students will have to pay a fee starting in 2017, which might lead to students not collecting their final certificate. Which are some other documents that you might be seeing? One that's fairly common, we see quite often, is the Attestation de réussite, which is a proof of graduation. It's not automatically issued as far as we understand. It's issued by the inspectorate, and they're responsible for quality assurance, but also very much involved in the issuing of documents. And students can contact the local branch of the inspectorate and ask for an Attestation de réussite, which will help them if they want to be admitted in higher education, since even national universities will be asking for this document, or to show their passing of the ex-État abroad. It's also sometimes used as a duplicate. So we have seen applications where the students have lost the actual final certificate and received another one of these to prove that they had, in fact, passed the examen d'État. This is a fairly simple document. It's produced by the inspectorate, has no real security features, and printed on regular paper, but it will give you some information so you can see the option. In this case, the student studied mathématiques physique, which is mathematics and physics, and the year in which the student passed the exam. And there will be a signature and a stamp by the inspectorate. Another really common document is the bulletin, which is the mark sheet for secondary education. And this one is issued by the secondary school. And it's like the previous document, there will be no security features except for maybe a stamp and a signature. We at our office don't really like to work with this document. We prefer the Attestation de réussite or final certificate, as this is a document filled in by the school and signed by the school. And it's a country with a national examination, so we prefer documents that can be directly linked to the national examination. That said, it will provide for the last. This is one for the 6th year. The scores for the yearly grade semester over here, second semester over here, and there's also a place reserved for the results for the examen d'état, the final state exam of secondary education, to be filled in. But all signatures are school signatures. And then finally, there is the actual final certificate, which is more elusive to obtain. Students will have to wait a little longer to obtain this document. It's issued 1 to 5 years after graduation, and this is a national model. So the ministry will be ordering a security paper and will be printing the documents for everyone who passed the examen d'état on this security paper. And if you manage to see an original of this document, it's really well secured. So you can see an example of what you can see if we expose this very document to UV light. You can see drawings in UV reflecting ink on the document. Also, some things to notice that these documents are distributed by the inspectorate, and so students can pick these up at the inspectorate or at their local school. And there's more security features. So again, you will find the section, in this case, littéraire, and the option, which is Latin and philosophy, the obtained grades. The 2009 model, I think it's the first model having a hologram over here on the left. The signatures have been printed for quite a while, but there is a picture of the student over here. And it's really funny since it's covered in a bluish kind of material and there's a dry stamp running over the picture. And they usually also have a watermark. So if you have any doubts, these documents are fairly easy to see whether they are the original, whether they are authentic or not. Now, this is an example from 1994, just to show that the document has evolved. Every few years, they update the model, but it hasn't evolved that much. The main structure is still more or less the same. And this is a document issued when the country was Zaire. So it's also to make a point about naming in the DRC. So people in the DRC, they have a name that consists of 3 parts. And I'll use the name of the former president as example, as Joseph Kabila, but his full name in Congolese terms would be Joseph Kabila Kabange, with Joseph being the Christian first name, Kabila being the family name, and Kabange being the African given post name. And when the country was called Zaire under the rule of Mobutu, Mobutu had decided as part of his policy of authenticity that Congolese were only to use their African names. They could no longer use their Christian names. So on documents from the Zaire period, you will only find the African family name and the African post name. And this is a trend that some institutions even continued for quite a while after the country was renamed back to République démocratique du Congo. So if Joseph Kabila had studied in the Zaire period, his credential would have mentioned Kabila Kabange and not Joseph Kabila, how we would know him. Useful information sources. So the website of the Ministry of Higher Secondary and Professional Education is actually quite good. They have a result checker on it. This is a screenshot from the result checker. And you can look for results. At this moment, only results for 2017 and 2018 can be found. They had a previous version of the website about a little more than a year ago, where you could look up all results from 2008 up to today. So we hope they're in the process of adding all those other years, and soon we will be able to search all results between 2008 and 2019. There are also graduation lists for the academic year 2018 that you can download as PDFs. And they started the whole digitalization of results in 2008. Before that, there were graduation lists, paper graduation lists distributed by the inspectorate. And we have seen people who have copies of these graduation lists. So it can be handy if you speak to an applicant, he or she might have one of those graduation lists. Now, About higher education, so we'll be mainly talking about the old structure of education since it's still in place in almost all of higher education, and it's the GLD system. It's based on the old Belgian system of education, and if you look at this, at it like this, it might seem like a 4-cycle system, but they call it a 3-cycle system. The first cycle leads to a credential of graduat, and it's a 3-year cycle. Interesting as in engineering, this cycle leads to a degree of ingénieur technicien, which would translate as technical engineer. Then there's the second cycle that leads to the licence degree. It's 2 years. Except also in engineering, it's also 2 years, but leads to the ingénieur civil or the ingénieur, which would translate as civil engineer or engineer. An exception is for medicine, where the second cycle takes 3 years and leads to the degree of docteur en médecine, which would translate as a medical doctor. And then you have the third cycle that's divided in 2 phases. So the first phase is usually the Diplôme des études supérieures or Diplôme d'études approfondies, which would take 2 years. It takes a licence or a comparable qualification for entry, and usually higher scores like 65% or higher are required in order to go to the third cycle. An exception again is medicine, where they can obtain in the third cycle a degree of specialization en médecine of 4 to 6 years, which is a medical specialization, like for example surgery. In the regular track, after finishing the DES or the DEA, students can decide to work on a doctoral thesis and obtain a doctorate, which would take 3 to 5 years. Then in 2014, the National Education Framework Law announced a new system based on the post-Bologna French system of education called LMD. And this is a system where the first 3 years will lead to a licence, then 2 further years will lead to a master, and then 3 to 5 extra years will lead to a doctorate. And it's interesting and also complex that this will be a gradual restructuring, and the initiative lies with the Ministry of Higher Education and University Education. And so institutions are not allowed to restructure their programs without explicit authorization by the ministry. And also, there haven't been a lot of institutions that have been given this right, but currently there's a pilot program running where several ESTM, which are institutes, higher institutes for medical technologies, they got the right to turn their programs in midwifery and natural resources management to LMD style programs. So very probable in the near future, we will be seeing credentials from the GLD and the LMD systems being awarded alongside each other. Now, about institutions, which is another thing that can be tricky in the DRC, finding out whether the institution that has issued a document is recognized or not. There is an incomplete list on the website of the Ministry of Higher and University Education. So they're still working on it. Sometimes institutions are added, but currently there's only the public universities and some types of higher institutes. There have been complete lists in 2003 and 2009, so maybe your NARIC might have a copy of those, but currently you cannot find these lists online anymore. So if you have an institution and you would be legislation to find out status, it's interesting to know that public institutions are always recognized. All of their programs are considered recognized. So since it's the ministry that's saying which programs can be offered and which cannot be offered. So if an institution wants to offer a new program, they have to have the authorization by the ministry. Private institutions can be trickier. They have been allowed since the early 90s, and they can have several statuses. So if you're confronted with legislation regarding their status, you can see that they're either autorisés à fonctionner, which means that they're authorized to operate, so they can open their buildings, they can admit students, they can offer education, but they cannot yet award degrees that will be signed by the minister. If they have the agrément, which is the official status that they need to award degrees, they can award degrees that are signed by the minister, and this agrément can be given as provisoire, which is temporarily, or définitif, which would be definitive. There are some other things that further complicate things. So there's a limited amount of institutions that can organize the third cycle. In 2013, they decided to limit it to only the 3 oldest public universities, which are the Université de Kinshasa, the Université de Lubumbashi, and the Université de Kisangani. But it quickly turned out that it became very hard for those 3 institutions to solely organize the third cycle for all of the country. So part other institutions have been given the right to award third cycle qualifications. And on the website of the ministry, you can find the list here. There will be an instruction académique, which is an instruction by the ministry to the institutions that will list all institutions that can offer third cycle qualifications. And this is also a document that I got from the same document, Instruction académique of 2018. And it's again about the documentation to show that it can be quite hard to obtain documents that we might be requiring. And this is an official price list for all documents in Congolese francs. And you can see here the relevé des cotes, which would be the academic transcript costing 3,210 Congolese francs, which would be roughly comparable to €2. And issuing of the final degrees, which is more expensive. So for a first or a second cycle, the graduat or the licence, this would cost about €65. For a first phase of the third cycle, this would cost €85 more or less. And for a PhD level qualification, this would take about 175 euros. So the document that most students will have, and I think it's either free of charge or fairly cheap, is again an Attestation de réussite, which is a proof of graduation. This is a document made up by the school administration, signed by the Secrétaire Général Académique, who works more or less like a kind of register. It's usually a document without any security features, but it will have a wet stamp, signatures by staff of the university that you can compare with other examples. And it will mention the program, the deuxième licencié en droit public, so which would be a second license in public law, and the year in which the student passed. Another document that most students will have and that will cost about €2 is the relevé des cotes, which is the transcript of results. Also a document issued by the school administration, not having any real security features except for the signatures and the stamps. Also about the grading system, they will usually mention the course load in amount of hours and separate it between practical and theoretical hours. And the final result will be indicated as a percentage. So in this case, it's 51%, which would be satisfaction. In our experience, about 90% of students will obtain results in the scope of satisfaction. So distinction or grande distinction or even higher are fairly rare. Now, the final document and the most elusive to obtain, the Diplôme homologue, which is the actual final certificate. Students will have to pay the fees that were in the process earlier in order to obtain this document. And even then, it can take quite a while for them to actually receive the documents. So if you look at this specific example, this is a document by the Université de Kinshasa, which is one of the 3 oldest public institutions. So we can assume that the student paid the fees to obtain the document. So here it says the 3rd November of 2014. So the school made the document after the student paid the fees. And the homologation, which means the acceptance of the document, it's a process that starts later. So the document will be sent to the Ministry of Higher and University Education for a second signature process, which is the left part. So the right part is reserved for the school, the left part is for the ministry. And you can see that the document has finally been signed by the ministry on the 21st of December 2015, taking a little more than a year to actually have the document homologated. And what is this homologation process? So the ministry claims that this is a process where they will verify all the information, whether the student actually met the admission requirements and legally passed from year to year as it should be. And if everything is fine, it will be entered into the register of homologated degrees and signed by the Minister of Higher Education himself, the signature of Theophile Mbenda Fundu, who was minister in December 2015. Also, the ministry provides the paper on which these documents are printed, which will almost always be security paper. There's several print houses that they use. This is one from the Hotel des Monnaies, who always use security papers. So you can see UV fibers in the document and a watermark. Some of the other print houses, mainly used for the higher institutes, don't have the security features, but you can assume that these documents will always be high quality offset print. Also, useful information sources. It's useful to know that a lot of institutions in the DRC mention lists of graduates on their website. I'm not sure whether they always do this for verification purposes. So in the second case from the Institut Supérieur d'Informatique et de Gestion de Goma, they mention an actual graduation list for which they usually use the word palmarès. But in the first case, it says Diplôme signé, and we feel like these lists titled Diplôme signé means degrees signed, are mainly used to inform their students that their document has been signed by the minister and that they can come and pick it up. But often those lists are kept on the website for quite a while, and we think it's very reassuring if we can find the name of a student of whom we're evaluating the document in one of these lists. And also, if you would have any doubts and want to verify authenticity, it's important to know if the student considers it safe. If he or she might be in a refugee-like situation, it might be more tricky to contact an institution. But if the student doesn't have any problems with you contacting the institution, in our experience for secondary education, it works best contacting them through their official contact information at their website. There is an email address, and they do reply, although I have to say honestly that in our experience, they usually take months to reply on emails, but they do reply eventually. For higher education, we found that we get most success if we contact the Secrétaire Général Académique directly, who will fill more like a registrar-like role, or in smaller institutions who don't have someone with this function, the Directeur Général. And also in our experience, following up by telephone can make a lot of difference. So a lot of institutions who usually don't reply will reply if we contact them by telephone. And then we also added a glossary of terms where you can find a lot of the things that are mentioned on documents. So you can use this list when seeing documents if there's an abbreviation that you cannot understand. One more thing that I want to point out about the graduation lists, we've added a few more of them in the actual country briefing, so you can find more of them there. And that was all for the presentation, so I would like to thank everyone for their attention, and I hope we can help you if you have any more questions.
Thank you, Kim and Angela, for your excellent presentation. Very informative. If there are any questions, please write them in the chat, and then either Angela or Kim or both will answer them. Okay. I'm going to mute myself again.
Hello, Monica. Thank you for the question. So about the ESTM, they're actually kind of institutions. So they're not branches of the. So they're not branches like you have the ESTM in Kinshasa. You have ESTM all over the country. So they're the higher institutes for medical techniques or higher institutes for medical technologies. And most of them are considered to be public higher education institutions, so they're automatically recognized. But I would have to look in our lists of recognized institutions to find out whether this institution whether the Bukavu one is recognized or not.
Are there any more questions? I don't see that anyone is typing, so I'm going to take that as a no. Okay. I would like to thank our presenters today for their presentations on the Democratic Republic of Congo. And please remember that the PowerPoints, the recording, the country briefing, all will be available, not only for this country, but for all of the countries that have been included in this series. Everything is available on the project website. And I hope, this is now the last one, so we've reached the end of these 5 webinars. I hope that they will be useful to you in your daily work. The last thing that I would like to ask you to do is, okay, Kim is looking something up. We're not quite done yet. But as I was going to say, before everybody signs off, we would appreciate it if you could fill in the survey, but let's wait and see what happens with this one institution.
Hello, so I'm looking in our list. So it's in the province Sud Kivu, so the South Kivu province. You can find Institut Supérieur et Technique Médicale Bukavu in the list of public higher education institutions. So they are recognized in 2009 at least. Okay, what I said is that I looked it up in our list of recognized institutions from 2009 that we have from the ministry, and the ESTM de Bukavu is mentioned as a public higher education institution. But don't hesitate to, if you want to ask about another institution, or maybe we can provide you the list of 2009 institutions so you can look it up yourself.
Kim, did you see Mark's question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Mark. I think there is going on in relation to the convention, recognition convention. I have to check the facts to know who's involved. But I do, from a point of view of recognition convention for Africa, or for African states, with regard to a framework of qualifications, I again have no information in relation to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but I do think there are a number of countries in Central Africa who have a framework of qualifications. So often this will mean the DRC will establish one in the coming years. Okay.
Okay, I'm not sure if there are any more questions, but going on. Okay, again, I'd like to thank our presenters and thank all of you for attending the webinar. If you have any questions, you can always get in touch with Angela and with Kim. I'm sure they'd be very happy to help you further. The survey is this, and I'm going to keep the webinar room open for another few minutes, give you all an opportunity to fill this in. Thank you very much for that. And we'll be seeing each other, I'm sure, some other time in the future with maybe other webinars. But thanks again for attending, and bye for now.